Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
You all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Begin by praising our Creator, by bearing witness that none has the right to be worshipped except for Him. We praise Him, we thank Him, we glorify Him, the God of Noah, the God of Abraham, the God of Moses, the God of Jesus, the God of Muhammad. May His peace and blessings be upon them all. First of all, not worthy at all of any of the words that were mentioned in the introduction, and I'm not going to spend time debunking them, but I do thank you for your kindness and for your personal abundance and the good assumptions and things that you said about me. But I want to start off with a very human story. How many of you could take a guess as to how many police shootings there have been this year? How many fatalities at the hands of officers there have been in 2018 alone? Numbers.
100.
We're averaging 100 a month. What civilized nation in the world has its law enforcement inflict terror on a regular basis against a large segment of its population? How is this acceptable? And how do we live like this? Stephon Clark just happened to make the news cycle. There are many beautiful black bodies that have been riddled with bullets, and they don't even get a hashtag. And I want to start off, since the topic that I'm going to be speaking about, and forgive me because I do want to save some for tomorrow, intersectionality and social justice. Too often our communities do not mobilize together because they do not recognize that the same vicious disease that targets any minority targets every minority. And no, it's not called white nationalism, it's called white supremacy, even if the trigger was pulled by a man who did not have white skin. It's systems of white supremacy that continue to oppress all of our communities, and too often we don't recognize the pain of another community until that pain inconveniently visits us. I want to share with you a story from 2005 that many of you, I would assume all of you, have not heard before. In 2005 in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I'm from, anyone heard the name Jamila Arshad? No hashtag, no social media, no outrage, no justice. Dr. Jamila Arshad was an African-American Muslim woman doctor. Wealthy, well-to-do, married to a wealthy, well-to-do doctor, both beautiful, charitable souls that contribute not just to the Muslim community, but to their city as a whole. As evidenced by the fact that on her way home one day, she saw a boy that was riding his bike that was hit by a car, and she stopped to help that boy because she's a doctor. When the police arrived at the scene, an assumption was made that she wasn't a licensed doctor. She was picked up and slammed to the pavement, handcuffed and thrown in the back of a police car, had a seizure, and was left back there for up to 2 hours to make sure that she was dead, even though the hospital was less than 8 minutes away. The tragedy of that family is not known to the American public. Charges were filed, and as we have seen time and time again, nothing happened. Cases were brought forward, the best lawyers, but even the best lawyers cannot compete with a system that is built on white supremacy and on the subjugation of minorities in this country. There was no justice served in this world. And in the privileged Muslim community, a suburban Muslim community in New Orleans, we were shell-shocked. so many people who had never encountered, except for the protective police forces that operate in suburban America, had now understood that this was a problem that affects all of us and could visit any one of us at any moment. In Dallas, just a few months ago, Jordan Edwards, 15 years old, straight A student, and I'm going to tell you why I'm mentioning his grades. The most outstanding kid that you could think of, spotless. And we know how much the media loves to vilify black victims.
Yes.
Can't find anything on him. Outstanding father, one of the most loving fathers that I've ever met in my life. A proud man who has done so much for his kids, done so much for his children. Jordan was in the car with his brothers when Officer Roy Oliver, an Iraq vet, fired his rifle into the car, struck Jordan in the head in front of his brothers, and his brothers saw smoke coming out of his head. Saw their brother murdered in front of them. The first police story was that the car was backing up violently towards Roy Oliver, when it showed that he was not backing up. Well, it was driving away too quickly, because you can't make up your mind when your story changes every single minute. And you know you have cover from a system that will not hold you accountable. And many who came to the defense of Jordan Edwards, and first it started off, well, maybe he was drunk, maybe he was partying, maybe they were causing a ruckus at that party that those kids were having. There was no alcohol in his body. Jordan did absolutely nothing wrong with being a 15-year-old black kid at night in a car with an officer who thought that it was okay to fire a long rifle into that car and strike the kid in the head. And the brothers of Jordan, I don't know where they're at, if this is still the case right now, for months couldn't even sleep with the lights off. And though there was the initial outpouring of love and support, Jordan's father has to work overtime now. Because when the families of police brutality suffer, there are no flags that are lowered half-staff. Community organizations don't rush to hand over a big $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 check and get pictures so they can get some goodwill in return from that family. Most of the time, those families have to wash cars to pay legal defense, drive trucks at night, do whatever it is that they can just to make do, because they cannot even grieve their child without having to fund what's necessary to try to pursue justice, though it is so unlikely in the country that we live in today, in our country with the systems as they exist today. Hashtags don't pay bills. And too often these families are forgotten 2-3 months down the line when the marches stop. And then we see the horrible miscarriages of justice like the one we saw this week with Alton Sterling. I remember when Alton Sterling was murdered. Alton Sterling was murdered in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The modern-day lynching. That was the initial reason why Colin Kaepernick took a knee. But apparently that's more egregious and more of an offense in this country. That a man being murdered on camera, the way that Alton was, and the way that Philando Castile was. July 7th, 2016, we marched in Dallas, Texas, because of the deaths of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. I have never seen more emotion and more anger and more hurt in a demonstration than I saw that night in Dallas. I've never seen people more fed up than that night in Dallas. Yet still, the protesters shook hands with the police officers that were there and thanked them for protecting that protest. And many of them offered words of support because they recognized it as well, that this is a systemic problem. This isn't a case of a few bad apples. And after the protest was over, one man shot 5 police officers dead in Dallas, Texas. 5 officers who were protecting that protest. Many people try to equate the two tragedies. Many try to equate their plights. And in some ways, there is an intersectionality. Brent Thompson, who was one of the officers that was guarding the protest that night, his son committed suicide this year. There's pain in losing your father. There's pain in losing your son. There's pain in losing a family member. So yes, we can find, at the bare minimum, an intersectionality of pain. But we don't equate plights. There's a systemic problem, and we usually don't recognize that problem until it hits our families, until it visits our homes. And when you make peaceful protest impossible, then you make violence inevitable. People feel like they're unheard. And those of us who have platforms or who are in spaces where these people are often not heard need to make sure that their voices are amplified. Those of us who are in positions in which we can raise those plights. And I'm not talking about a social media platform only. I'm talking about your place of economic privilege, political privilege, whatever it may be. When you use your privilege to amplify those voices, then you can claim to be standing with them. It's not enough to simply feel sympathy. It's not enough to say we need to stop the cycle of violence and not acknowledge why this keeps on happening and what the root cause of this violence is. It's not enough for us to just keep on putting hashtags out there. Because as vicious and as atrocious as those videos were of Philando, Alton, Stefan, in the cases of Philando and Alton Sterling, that did them absolutely no good in the courtroom. You cannot critique the protests and the rioting and the pain if you are not critiquing the source of that pain.
Right.
You do not have the right to raise your voices against those that are disturbing the peace if you said nothing about their family members being stolen away from them. You are in no moral position to critique the anger that emanates from historically oppressed communities when you have done nothing but turn a blind eye to the subjugation of those very communities and to the deprivation of basic human rights that those communities have to suffer through. It's not black deaths matter, it's black lives matter. Because it starts there. These things don't operate in a vacuum. They come from somewhere. What are we doing to actually elevate communities and minorities that have been historically subjugated? And do we always have to wait for it to hit one of our own? And who is our own? Dear brothers and sisters, right now in America we're facing a crisis of many sorts. It's interesting because in Dallas, Texas, the other day, we're having a debate about removing Confederate memorials. And just think about how sick that is. Idols of white supremacy reigning in our communities, and people refusing to have them removed. Think about what that means. How are we going to raise love in our communities if we can't even tear down hate when it's as obvious as those monuments and those statues? And I watched one by one people come up with the most emotional, racist garbage in defense of those monuments and statues. And I thought to myself, if only you had the same heart for living black beings that you have for stones dedicated to ancestors of hate, then we'd make progress. I listened to a woman actually sit there and say that instead of taking down monuments to white supremacy, we should remove Malcolm X Boulevard and the image that's in downtown Dallas of him because he was a hate preacher. Not much has changed in America. And you know what else? I think that it's important for us to see it as ugly as it's been in our faces, on our screens, as we are today. We cannot begin to diagnose the problem if we're not willing to even fully acknowledge it. So, watch the videos. Watch the videos. Pay attention. Put your son in that place. Put your husband in that place. Put your daughter in that place. Put your wife in that place. Put your family member in that place and think about how outraged and angry you would be. And when you come back to reality and realize that that wasn't your brother or your sister or your husband or your wife or your child, ask yourself why you're not angrier. The question should not be, how do we quell the voices of anger? The question should be, why are more people not angry? Because if more people were angry, then maybe we could organize that anger more effectively. The tragedy is the indifference of America to this historic and systemic police brutality. That's more tragic than a Kings game getting shut down.
That's right.
That's a greater tragedy than a freeway being shut down.
That's right.
We're not calling for violence, we're calling to an end to violence. And if you stand in the way of those who have peacefully and strategically tried to end this disproportionate violence against the black community at the hands of police officers, not just in Sacramento, but around the country, then do not tell protesters to sit down and be quiet. That makes you no different than the woman whose name I will not mention that says, "Shut up and dribble." That makes you no different than them. And what we'll see with the case of Stephon Clark is what we've seen with so many other victims of this terror that has reigned on America in different ways. That if you can cast enough suspicion around his character and make him evil enough and make him not worth the struggle, then maybe people will just say, well, he had it coming. Trayvon had it coming because he was wearing a hoodie. Alton had it coming. Did you not see his gold teeth? He was selling CDs outside a store. Philando had it coming. Jordan had it coming. We don't know why, but we'll figure it out. They'll find a way to make it so. They will find a way to make it so. He's no angel. He had it coming. Think about how unjust that is. Hey, brothers and sisters, I don't want to come here with a message of fear or a message of despair. I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can use this moment to make sure that we don't have to gather in other cities in America because others are treated in the same way that Stephon was treated. I'm hopeful that if we are angry enough and organized enough, then maybe we can begin to put an end to this terror. I'm hopeful that if enough people start to see their own pain in the pain of the other, then maybe they will do something about that pain. I'm hopeful that if we begin to see each other as human beings, then maybe we will recognize how flawed our country is domestically and with our foreign policy. I'm hopeful that we will start to question the way that our government has been operating here and abroad. I'm hopeful that we'll start to see the children that have been murdered or have had the quality of their lives ripped away from them. I'm hopeful that we'll start to see them as our own. The children of Stephon will not have a hashtag and most likely cannot even fully comprehend what's going on. I hope that they realize as they grow that there wasn't just a community that stood with them, but there were communities that stood with them. Various backgrounds and races, and faiths and walks of life that stood with them. Jordan Edwards' brothers they're not technically dead, but a piece of them is dead. And that's not something that can be analyzed through statistics. That's not something that the media will ever catch on. This is pain and this is real. And in the situation that I know, that I mentioned, Dr. Jamila Arsha, her family, 13 years later, has never been the same. Has absolutely never been the same. Because a mother and a wife was ripped away from them without even a hashtag, with no justice in this world. I want each and every single one of you to take a long look at the pictures of Stefan holding his children, and let that be the image that you have of him. I want you to resist the urge to demonize and vilify him in some way to somehow make sense of what happened. It doesn't make sense. Don't try to make sense of it. It doesn't make sense. That's the problem. In what world is it justified to gun a man down 20 times with 20 bullets close up while he's holding a cell phone? Maybe one day we'll start to treat black victims the way we treat white terrorists in this country. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.